Okay, getting started here in just a minute. Bear with me. Running all kinds of late tonight. Almost there. Bear with me.
When you feel it's hopeless, when you think that you lost, oh, I will take your hand and we'll rise up from the dust. Oh, here we go, 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 let us heal and grow. You won't be alone, we're unstoppable. Don't be afraid to show what we're going for.
Okay, finally made it. Good evening. We are up to chapter 25 and 26 tonight on the secret history of the world. So this and one more reading, and we should be totally done. So let's just jump straight on into it, shall we? Okay, so chapter 25 is titled The Mystical Sexual Revolution, Cardinal Richelieu. I don't know if I butchered that or not. Cagliostro, The Secret Identity of the Comte de Saint Germain, Swedenborg, Blake, and the Sexual Roots of Romanticism. So those are all of the subjects we'll cover in this chapter. All right. However, in the middle of the 18th century, the rise to supremacy of the United States was only a mystical vision. In the late 17th and 18th centuries, France became the most powerful and influential nation. Extremes of good and evil, rapier and sharp tongue, decided the fate of the world in the corridors of the Louvre, then Versailles. It is perhaps significant that though Descartes spent many years researching the Rosicrucians, even journeying to Germany to try to track them down, he never succeeded. A prey to visions, he was evidently not, like Newton, adept at alchemical techniques that might give repeated, perhaps even controlled access to the spirit worlds. In collaboration with the mathematician and theologian Marin Mersenne, I'm not sure, Mersenne, whose patron was Richelieu, Descartes developed a rationalist philosophy, a closed system of reasoning without the necessity of reference to the realm of the senses. The philosophy of Descartes and I'm going to say Mersenne, helped evolve a new form of cynicism. It enabled a succession of French diplomats and politicians to run rings round their opposite numbers. They might wear similar, though rather more fashionable clothes than the ones worn by their contemporaries in Germany, Italy, Holland, Spain, or England, but the difference in consciousness was as drastic as that between the conquistadors and the Aztecs. The French court was the most magnificent in human history, not only in material terms, but in the sophistication of its culture. Beautiful and heartless, it wittily interpreted all human actions as motivated by vanity, according to the maxims of La Rochefoucauld. I don't know that term. It's a long French word. Quote, when we dwell on the good qualities of others, we are expressing esteem for our own finer feelings. End, end quote. Is one of his sly, devastating critiques of human nature. Another quote, um, Quote, "No matter how well we are spoken of," he said, "we learn nothing we do not already know." End quote. In the gap left by by the departure of sincerity arose a tyranny of taste and style. Okay, and then we have a picture with a rather long, a very long caption. Uh, okay, here we go. Et in Arcadia Ego by Nicholas Poussin. Poussin? Uh, Poussin's connection with the René Le Chateau mystery has led to much speculation on his esoteric interests. But to look for Rosicrucian interests, as some have done, is to bark up the wrong tree. Poussin's Poussin's spiritual mentor was the Jesuit Athanasius Kircher, perhaps the greatest scholar of esoterica in the 17th century. As the most learned Egyptologist of the day, Kircher was concerned to verify the perennial philosophy and universal secret history encoded in Egyptian texts, the Bible, and the classical tradition, represented here by an allusion to the episode in Virgil, what the crouching shepherd is pointing to on a tomb which existed in Poussin's time, though it has recently been destroyed, is an inscription that confirms the secret history in this book. Even I was in Arcadia Even I was in Arcadia refers to the turning point in history described in chapter 5 when the idyllic vegetative life of humanity was invaded by animal desire and death. This was the fall of the mother goddess. In esoteric Christianity, Mary Magdalene was the incarnation of the goddess, redeemed by her beloved. As we saw, Mary Magdalene spent the last years of her life in the south of France, according to church tradition. What Poussin was literally pointing to here, therefore, was the tomb of Mary Magdalene. Okay, so let me bring up that picture for you. So this is supposed to be the tomb of Mary Magdalene in the south of France. I could study all of these pictures for quite a long time. They're very interesting, but me sitting here studying pictures would not be interesting to you. So I'm going to continue on. It looks like we're just about to go in. Oh, we are in an ad. Oh, damn it. I didn't notice when we started it. So I'm going to go back to the picture. And I will just share that with you. Okay. So I don't know where we were when the ad started. I wasn't paying attention. I was looking at this picture and reading. So I brought us back to the picture so you can see it for a second. Hey, Vesper. How are you doing tonight? So we're looking at a picture of what's supposed to be the tomb of Mary Magdalene in the south of France, supposedly. And we just finished an ad, so I don't know where we left off. I'm doing great. I'm running a little late tonight. I just barely started, but I want to get through this book um, as quickly as possible. I was really trying to time it so that I finished it at the end of 2024. And now that I'm cutting into 25, I'm anxious to be done with it, even though I'm really enjoying it. Okay, so jumping back into the text. As spirituality was severed from sexuality, libertines like oh man, I'm gonna butcher the hell out of this name. Uh, Choderlos de Laclos. I don't know. Author of Les Liaisons Dangereuses, something like that. dangerous liaisons. um, I can translate it, I just can't pronounce it. I actually can read more French than I can speak. Anyway, said to be a spider, so dangerous liaison, said to be a spider at the center of a vast web of sexual and political intrigue. Crébillon Fields, author of the best of the libertine novels Les Égarements de Coeur et l'Esprit, something about heart and spirit. Casanova and de Sade became representative men admired for the complexity and cleverness of their power plays. In all sex, there is an element of striving. Now, this striving became an end itself. Even among the most sensitive and intelligent, sex could be reduced to an exercise of power. Following Cardinal Richelieu's unprincipled machinations to promote national interests in the reign of Louis XIII, Louis XIV aggregated to himself the title of Sun King, but of course there was a dark side. While haute cuisine was devised to keep nobles contented at court, peasants were taxed to the point of starvation, and Richelieu massacred religious dissenters. Later, Marie Antoinette would be shielded from sight of the sick, old, or poor, and Louis XVI obsessively read and reread an account of the beheading of Charles I, drawing to himself the thing he feared most. Rumors of powerful esoteric secrets echoed round the court. Cardinal Richelieu carried a wand of gold and ivory, and enemies feared its magic powers. His mentor, Père Joseph, the original Eminence Grise, uh, taught him spiritual exercises that developed psychic powers. He employed a Kabbalist called Gaffarel to teach him the secrets of the occult. A man called Dubois, or Dubois, rumored to be a descendant of Nicholas Flamel, went to see him carrying an obscurely phrased magical primer. But Dubois was unable to interpret it for the cardinal, and I'm really stumbling here. I'm sorry. But Dubois was unable to interpret it for the cardinal and get him results, and so Dubois was hanged. It seems Richelieu became desperate to achieve the breakthrough to the other side that he craved, because he employed increasingly extreme methods. Urbain Grandier, an alleged devil worshipper, was being slowly tortured to death at Richelieu's behest when he is reported to have warned, quote, "You are an able man, do not destroy yourself," end quote. Louis XIV's mistress, Madame de Montespan, caused her young rival to die by means of a black mass. One of Louis XIV's doctors, called Lezebrun, gave a strange account of what happened to a friend of his who had concocted what he believed to be the elixir of life. He had started to take a few drops every morning at sunrise with a glass of wine. After 14 days, his hair and nails began to fall out, and he lost his nerve. He started giving the potion to an elderly female servant, but she too became frightened and refused to continue. So finally, he started an old hen on a course of this medicine by soaking corn with it. After 6 days, its feathers began to fall out until it became completely naked. Then 2 weeks later, new feathers began to grow brighter and more beautifully colored than the feathers she had had in her youth, and she began to lay eggs again. Amid extremes of cynicism and gullibility, where quacks and frauds where quacks and frauds were common, genuine initiates developed ways of presenting themselves to the outside world. Esoteric teachers had always known their wisdom looked foolish to the uninitiated. They had always focused on the tricky, paradoxical nature of the cosmos. Now initiates began to present themselves in the guise of tricksters and scoundrels. A poor boy from the back streets of Sicily reinvented himself as Count Cagliostro. By a mixture of mesmeric charm, his habit of using as bait Seraphita, his beautiful young wife, and above all his rumored possession of the Philosopher's Stone, he rose to the top of European society. To those at the bottom of society, he seemed most kind. He he seemed some kind of saint. Healing miracles performed among the poor of Paris, unable to afford a doctor, made him a popular hero. And when, after a short imprisonment, he was released from the Bastille, some 8,000 people came to cheer. When Cagliostro was challenged to a debate in front of his intellectual peers, his opponent, Court de Gebelin, a friend of Benjamin Franklin's, and a renowned expert on esoteric philosophy, soon admitted he was up against a man whose erudition far surpassed his own. Cagliostro also seems to have had remarkable powers of prophecy. In a famous letter of I don't know why I'm messing up so much tonight. In a famous letter of 20 June 1786, he prophesied that the Bastille would be completely destroyed, and it is said that he even predicted the exact date of this event, 14 July, in graffiti found inscribed on the wall of the prison cell in which he died. Anyone with supernatural power is bound to suffer temptation. Perhaps the most charismatic and disconcerting initiate of the 20th century was G.I. Gurdjieff. He deliberately presented his ideas in an absurd way. He wrote of an organ at the base of the spine that could enable everyone to see everything upside down and inside out, calling it the Kunderbuffer. In this way, he deliberately gave the power of the Kundalini serpent, the reserve of unredeemed energy that lies coiled at the base of the spine and which is center to tantric practice, a laughable name. It's also central to Kundalini yoga, specifically, which isn't necessarily tantric. Anyway, similarly, he wrote of gods in giant spaceships and that the surface of the sun is cool. Anyone who dismissed it showed himself unworthy. Anyone who persisted and was able to tune in found that Gurdjieff's spiritual disciplines worked. Since his death, it has emerged that he sometimes used his undoubted powers of mind control to prey on vulnerable young women. A friend of mine journeyed to India to visit the renowned teacher, adept, and miracle worker Sai Baba. My friend was traveling with his beautiful young girlfriend. After an exquisite dinner, the servants withdrew and Sai Baba took his guests into the library. My friend was perusing a book while his girlfriend talked to Sai Baba. He noticed that he was standing unusually close to her and became anxious when Sai Baba turned the conversation to the subject of the sexual dimension in Hindu myths. Suddenly, Sai Baba reached to ring a copper bell engraved with sigils and simultaneously seemed to grab something out of midair. He turned his hand palm up to reveal a golden chain with a crucifix on it. He told the girl that this was real magic and held his palm out to her, offering her the object, which seemed to my friend to glow with a dark aura. He also noticed that the sigils on the bell were tantric and realized that the intention was probably to bewitch his girlfriend with a view to seducing her. He asked where the chain came from. Quote, "It appeared before your very eyes," end quote, said Sai Baba. My friend took the chain from him to prevent his girlfriend from touching it. Holding it over his palm, he used the art of psychometry to determine its origins. He had a disturbing vision of grave robbers and realized that this crucifix and chain had been dug up from the grave of a Jesuit missionary. He confronted Sai Baba with this, and so, by demonstrating his own magical powers, he was able to make him back down. Telling me about this many years later, my friend said that since Prospero had broken his wand at the end of the Tempest, initiates had been forbidden to exercise their magical powers unless in exceptional circumstances like these. There is a law that if a white magician uses his occult power, an equal amount of power is made available to a black magician. Is there any other evidence to suggest that magic is still practiced today? In a secondhand bookstore in Tunbridge Wells, I recently came across a small cache of letters in which an occultist gave out advice on how to use magic spells to achieve their goals. One included introducing menstrual blood secretly into food as a way of awakening a man's sexual desires. This might seem outlandish, but in 2006, the British government announced its plans to give large grants for the development of biodynamic farming. This method, devised by Rudolf Steiner, depends on the correspondences between plants and the spirits of the stars described by Paracelsus and Boehme. Steiner recommends that an infestation of field mice should be dealt with by burying in the field the ashes of a field mouse prepared when Venus is in the sign of Scorpio. That went off into left field. Wow. Okay. If Cagliostro remains an enigma, the man he looked up to is an even greater mystery. Cagliostro's own account of meeting the Comte de Saint Germain at a castle in Germany in 1785 records that he and his wife arrived at 2 a.m., the appointed time. The drawbridge lowered, and they crossed to find themselves in a small, darkened room. Suddenly, as if by magic, great doors opened to reveal a vast temple made dazzling by the light of thousands of candles. In the middle of the temple sat the Comte de Saint Germain. He was wearing many fabulous diamond rings, and on his chest there rested a bejeweled device that seemed to reflect the light of all the candles and beam it on Cagliostro and Serafita. Sitting either side of Saint Germain, two acolytes held up bowls from which incense arose, and as Cagliostro entered, a disembodied voice he took to be the Count's, though his lips did not seem to move, resonated around the temple. Quote, "Who are you? Where did you come from? What do you want?" End quote. Of course, in at least one sense, Saint Germain knew exactly who Cagliostro was. The visit had been prearranged, after all, but here he was asking about his previous incarnations, his daemon, his deeper motives. Cagliostro threw himself on the ground in front of Saint Germain, and after a while said, quote, "I come to invoke the God of the faithful, the Son of nature, the Father of truth. I come to ask one of the 14,007 secrets he bears in his bosom. I come to give myself up as his slave, his apostle, his martyr." End quote. Clearly, Cagliostro thought he recognized Saint Germain, but who was he? There was a clue in the fact that Saint Germain then initiated Cagliostro into Templar mysteries, taking him on an out-of-body journey, flying him above a molten sea of bronze to explore the heavenly hierarchies. Saint Germain had appeared in European society quite suddenly in 1710, apparently from Hungary and seemingly about 50 years old. Small and dark-skinned, he always wore black clothes and extraordinary diamonds. His most arresting features were his hypnotic eyes. By all accounts, he quickly commanded attention in society because of his accomplishments, speaking many languages, playing the violin, and painting, and he also seemed to have an extraordinary ability to read minds. He was believed to practice secret breathing techniques taught by the Hindu fakirs, and in order to meditate better, he adopted yoga positions unknown in the West at that time. Though he attended banquets, he was never seen eating in front of others and drank only a strange herbal tea he concocted himself. But the greatest mystery surrounding the Comte de Saint Germain was his longevity. Having appeared in public life in 1710, apparently in late middle age, when he met the composer Rameau in Venice, he remained in public life at least as late as 1782 without appearing to age at all. Sightings of him by the great and the good continued as late as 1822. It would be tempting to dismiss all this as a romance in the style of Alexander Dumas, where were it not for the fact that witnesses who left accounts of meeting him over such a long period were of such high standing, as well as Rameau, they included Voltaire, Horace Walpole, Clive of India, and Casanova. He was a prominent figure at the court of Louis XV, an intimate of both Madame de Pompadour and the king himself, for whom he took diplomatic missions in Moscow, Constantinople, and London. There in 1761 he negotiated an agreement called the Family Compact, which paved the way for the Treaty of Paris, putting an end to the colonial wars. Whoa, I lost my place. Sorry. Putting an end to the colonial wars between France and Britain. Saint Germain's efforts always seem to be in the cause of peace, and though he is often lumped in with Cagliostro, he was never caught out in any act of dishonesty. Although nobody knew where his money came from, some said alchemy, he was evidently independently wealthy and by no means a desperate adventurer. So who was the Comte de Saint Germain? A key to his secret identity lies in Freemasonic history. It is said that it was he who coined the Freemasonic mantra liberty, equality, fraternity, and whether or not this is accurate, he may be seen as the living spirit of esoteric Freemasonry. More particularly, Saint Germain should be identified with another personality beset by rumor, counter rumor, and uncertainty about whether he really lived at all. In the secret history of Saint Germain Christ, is Christian Rosenkreutz reincarnated in the Age of Enlightenment. What? Okay. This is a weird sentence. I'm sorry. It looks like this is a title in the secret history of Saint Germain. Let me start that yet again. In the secret history, Saint Germain is Christian Rosenkreutz reincarnated. Okay, maybe that's just him putting it in italics, but usually when he puts it in italics, it's a title. But that doesn't, now it doesn't look like a title. Anyway, Christian Rosenkreutz reincarnated in the Age of Enlightenment, of imperial expansion, and international diplomacy. Sorry about stumbling through that so much. To borrow a phrase from the eminent science fiction writer and esotericist Philip K. Dick, he had learned how to reconstitute his body after death. This should alert us to an even deeper mystery. In an earlier incarnation, Rosenkreutz / Germain had been Hiram Abif, the master builder of Solomon's temple. The murder of Hiram Abif had led to the words being lost. On one level, the lost word was a power of supernatural procreation which humankind had wielded before the fall into matter. Part of the mission of Saint Germain through esoteric Freemasonry was the reintroduction of knowledge of the word into the stream of history. Okay, so now we have another fairly long caption and a picture. So the caption is La Très Sainte Trinsophie is a booklet often attributed to Saint Germain, and which certainly comes from the same school of occult Freemasonry, is an avowed account of initiation in which the candidate descends into the volcanic bowels of the earth and passes the night there. At dawn he climbs out of his underground chamber, following a star. He is freed of his material body and flies up to the planets, where he meets the old man of the palace. In the palace he sleeps for 7 days, and when he awakes, his robe is changed to beautiful, scintillating green. Then there is a strange passage in which he sees a bird with butterfly wings, and knows he must catch it. He drives a steel nail through its wings so that it is pinned down, but its eyes grow bright. Finally, in a hall with a beautiful naked woman, he stabs the sun with his sword. The sun shatters into dust, and each atom of dust becomes a sun in itself. The work is completed. This depiction of a portal is by Paolo Veronese, believed by theosophists to be an incarnation of one of the hidden masters. Okay. So there is our portal picture. All right, back to the reading. Um, the deepest mystery of this individuality, though, concerns an even earlier incarnation from the time when human bodies were on the borderline of becoming solid flesh. Enoch was the earliest prophet of the sun god, S-U-N, God, a man whose face shone with a sun-like radiance. When Saint Germain took Cagliostro on a tour of the heavens, they were going on the tour described in the Book of Enoch. In the phrase liberty, equality, fraternity, Saint Germain looked forward to a time when humanity would reach out to the sun god with freedom of thought and will, as they had failed to do the first time he came. The secret the secret history of the world from the late 6th century to the 19th century is dominated by the work behind the scenes of the great ascended masters of Western tradition, Enoch and Elijah, and by preparations for the descent from the skies of the archangel of the sun, and beyond this for the descent of an even greater being. These men were preparing the way for the second coming. As the 18th century progressed, sightings of the mysterious Count became rarer, but a mood of optimism and expectation filled the lodges of the secret societies. In France, the unknown philosopher, quote unquote, Saint Martin, I don't know, Saint Martin was teaching that every man is a king, quote unquote. Chevalier Ramsay, the Scottish laird who had founded a Grand Lodge in Paris in 1730, made a speech to new initiates in Paris in 1737. Quote, "The whole world is nothing but a great republic. We strive for the reunion of all people of an enlightened mind, not only through the love of the fine arts, but even more through the elevated principles of virtue, science, and religion, in which the interests of the brotherhood and that of the entire family of humankind can meet each other, and from which the subjects of all kingdoms can learn to love each other." End quote. Freemasonry provided a protected space for the tolerant discussion of ideas, for free scientific inquiry, and for investigation into the spirit worlds. Following the establishment of mother lodges in Scotland, London, and Paris, the great event of Freemasonry in the 18th century took place in the 1760s. This was the founding of the order of Elis Coens, or chosen priests, by the Portuguese Magus Martins de Pasquale. The rituals of the Eluscoans, devised by de Pascal, Pasquale, were sometimes up to 6 hours long and involved an incense that blended hallucinogens and fly agaric mushroom spores. In the in the later rituals of Stanislas de Guaita, Guaita, I'm not sure, Guaita. Much influenced by de Pasquale, a blindfold was removed, and the candidate might find himself facing men wearing Egyptian masks and headdresses who silently pointed swords at his chest. In the way that Dr. D had worked to bring back real spiritual experience into the church by the practice of ceremonial magic, men like de Pasquale and Cagliostro did the same in Freemasonry. In 1782, Cagliostro founded Egyptian Rite Freemasonry, which would be highly influential in both France and America. De Pascale's Bible. Where did I get Bible out of that word? Oh, my brain sometimes. De Pascale's pupil and successor, St. Martin placed less emphasis on ceremony and more on internal esoteric disciplines. Influenced in this by his reading of Boehme, his version of Martinist philosophy has remained highly influential in French Freemasonry to this day. Living in Paris at the time of the Terror, St. Martin allowed men and women to come to his apartment, initiating them by a mystical laying on of hands. They were in such peril that they continued to wear their masks even during their meetings in order to hide their identities even from one another. Famous for his genial, excoriating attacks on religion, Voltaire is often thought of as a God hater. In reality, it was organized religion he was against. When he was initiated by Benjamin Franklin, he was given the apron belonging to Helvetius to kiss. Helvetius was the famous Swiss scientist whose account of alchemical transmutation remains the second most highly authenticated account after that of Leibniz. The historian of Freemasonry and mystical experience, A.E. Waite, wrote of Masonry's, quote, dreams of antique science, proclaiming that the reality behind dreams must be sought in the spirit of dreams, end quote. He talked of Voltaire as the man, quote, who held the keys, who had forged the key, which opened up the door to this reality and unfolded amazing vistas of possibility. Condemned practices, forbidden arts, might lead through some clouds of mystery into the light of knowledge, end quote. We will see more clearly what this means in the next chapter, but for the moment it is enough to say that the initiates of the secret societies were amazed by these new vistas. Their breasts were full of such faith and optimism that they would undoubtedly have agreed with Wordsworth that bliss was it that dawn what? That bliss was it that dawned to be alive. I don't understand what he's trying to say there. Among the artists, writers, and composers of the secret societies, this great wealth of enthusiasm and these expectations of the dawn of a new age gave rise to the Romantic movement. Whenever there is a great flowering of imaginative art and literature, as for example in the Renaissance and Romanticism, we should suspect the presence somewhere in the shadows of sacred idealism as a philosophy of life and of the secret societies which cultivate that philosophy. This has been a history of the world according to idealism. If we take idealism in its philosophical sense of proposing that ideas are more real than objects, idealism in the more common colloquial sense, meaning living according to high ideals, was, as George Steiner has pointed out, an invention of the 19th century. In the previous century, the lodges of England, America, and France had worked to create societies that were less cruel, superstitious, and ignorant, less repressive and prejudiced, and more tolerant. The world had become all of these things, and also more insincere and frivolous. Even before the Terror, there was disquiet and anxiety that although society might be made to run along straight lines, this enterprise was adequate neither to human nature nor to other darker forces operating outside the laws of nature. Romanticism was partly an attempt to come to terms with a galvanic feeling of intensity rising up from below and what today we would call the unconscious. It would give rise to intense music and poetry. It would be impatient of convention, encouraging spontaneity and self abandon. In the land of Occult, perhaps writers saw France in particular as a land of, quote, soulless little dancing masters who did not understand the inner life of man, end quote. In Lessing, Schlegel, and Schiller, philosophical idealism became a philosophy of life once more. Above all, this idealism would exalt the imagination, holding the mystical and esoteric belief that the imagination is a higher mode of perception than that offered by the senses. Imagination can be trained to grasp higher realities than the materialism being peddled by the apostles of common sense. In conventional history, Romanticism was a reaction to the polite, ordered 18th century. In the secret history, it was demonic forces rather than merely subconscious forces that caused this reaction. The roots of this reaction were sexual. In early 1744, Jean-Paul Brockmer, a London watchmaker, worried what on earth was wrong with his lodger. Emanuel Swedenborg, a Swedish engineer, had seemed a quiet, respectable character, attending the local Moravian chapel every Sunday. Now his hair stood on end, he foamed at the mouth, and chased Brockmer down the street, gibbering and apparently claiming to be the Messiah. Brockmer tried to persuade him to see a doctor, but instead Swedenborg went to the Swedish embassy. When they wouldn't let him in, he ran to a nearby drainage ditch, undressed himself, and rolled around in the mud, throwing money at the crowd. In a recent breakthrough book, the fruit of years of meticulous research, Marcia Keith Suchard reveals that Swedenborg had been experimenting with certain sexual techniques for achieving extreme altered states of consciousness that were taught at the outwardly respectable Moravian chapel. Marcia Keith Suchard also shows that William Blake was brought up in this church and that these sexual practices inspired his poetry. We have touched on various techniques for inducing altered states, including breathing exercises, dancing, and meditation, but these sexual techniques are the hard stuff, the most closely guarded secrets of the secret societies. It's instructive, then, to follow with Marcia Keith Suchard the different stages of development of Swedenborg's practice as recorded in his journals and alluded to in his publications. Even as a boy, Swedenborg had experimented with breath control. He noticed that if he held his breath for long periods, he went into a sort of trance. He discovered, too, that by synchronizing his breath to his pulse, he could deepen the trance. Quote, "Sometimes I was reduced into a state of insensibility as to the body's senses, thus almost unto the state of dying persons, retaining, however, my interior life unimpaired, attended with the power of thinking, and with sufficient breathing for life." End quote. Persistence in these techniques could bring practitioners great rewards. Quote, "There is a certain cheering light and joyful confirmatory brightness that plays around the sphere of the mind, and a kind of mysterious radiation that darts through some temple in the brain. The soul is called into a more inward communion, and has returned at that moment into the golden age of its intellectual perfections. The mind, in the kindling flame of its love, despises all in comparison, all merely corporeal pleasures." End quote. Swedenborg seems to be describing different stages and altered states of the kind we have seen involved in the process of initiation. As Marcia Keith has pointed out, modern neurological research has confirmed that meditation increases the levels of DHEAS and melatonin, secretions produced by the pineal gland and pituitary glands, which together are said by occultists to create the third eye. At the age of 15, Swedenborg was sent to live with his brother-in-law, who for the next 7 years would be his mentor, and it was here at his new home that Swedenborg's own research turned markedly Kabbalistic. We have seen how in the Kabbalah, as in all esoteric traditions, the creation is conceived of in terms of a series of emanations, sephiroth or servants, from the cosmic mind. In the Kabbalah, as much as in the myths of the Greeks and Romans, these emanations are thought of as male and female. The Ein Sof, the unattainable cosmic mind, emanates male, and female spirits, and these intertwine in a sexual way as the impulsive creation spirals downwards. In the same way that erotic images in the mind create sperm, the Ensof's acts of loving imagination generate physical effects. The imagination, and particularly the sexually fired imagination, is therefore seen to be the root principle of creativity. On the Kabbalistic account, the fall happened because of an imbalance which occurred between the male and female Sephiroth. By imagining balanced and harmonious love-making between the Sephiroth, the adept helps set right this primordial cosmic wrong. In Kabbalistic lore, the cherubim, arching their wings above the Ark of the Holy Covenant in the Holy of Holies in the Jerusalem temple, were seen as an image of the harmonious love-making of the male and female Sephiroth. Then, when the second temple was sacked by Antiochus in 168 BC, these erotic images were paraded through the streets to ridicule the Jews. When the temple was destroyed in AD 70, a great need arose in the heart of the people to rebuild it. Sacred imagery of the lovemaking of the male and female Sephira lay at the heart of the program to right a historical wrong. Swedenborg also wrote about rhythmic breathing, methods relating to the pulse of the genitals. It is evident that while living with his father's brother-in-law, he began to practice such exercises in breath control in conjunction with the imagining of naked human bodies contorted erotically into the shapes of Hebrew letters already alluded to. These were believed to be powerful magical emblems or sigils. Similar techniques of making sexual energies and using them as a source of spiritual good are used by some Hasidic groups today. Bob Dylan, who is in some way heir to the poetic tradition of Blake, has explored some of these practices. The element of control is crucial to these practices, and this was emphasized in another esoteric tradition of sexually charged spirituality. The expansion of European empires eastwards had caused rumors of tantric practices to trickle back to in the other direction. Swedenborg explored sexual tantra in detail. Psychological discipline was needed to achieve prolonged arousal. This in turn was needed to redirect sexual energies to the brain and thereby achieve a breakthrough into the spirit worlds, a visionary ecstasy rather than a narrowly sexual one. Swedenborg also mastered what is, by all accounts, an extremely difficult technique of muscle control known to Indian adepts, whereby at the moment of ejaculation the sperm is diverted to the bladder and therefore not expelled. Clearly, the techniques are dangerous, one of the reasons why they are kept so secret. They risk the sort of nervous breakdown witnessed by Swedenborg's landlord, not to mention madness and death. The peculiar admixture to his researches that Swedenborg discovered while attending the Moravian church in New Fetter Lane was a specifically Christian version of the arcana of love. At that time, Moravians in London were under the sway of the charismatic Count Zinzendorf. Members of the congregation were encouraged by him to visualize, smell, and touch in imagination the side wound of the body of Christ. This wound was, in Zinzendorf's vision, a sweet, luscious vagina oozing a magical juice. The spear of Longinus was to be thus repeatedly and ecstatically was to be thrust repeatedly and ecstatically into it. Okay. Wow. That's some odd stuff. All right, so we have a picture. It has a very short caption. Late 18th century European depiction of tantric practice. Okay, so there you go. Late 18th century tantric practice or depiction of it. Interesting. But getting back to it, we're almost done with this chapter. We've got about 2 pages of text left here. Zinzendorf encouraged sex as a sacramental act and urged his followers to see the divine spiritual emanations in each other at the moment of climax. A joint mental prayer at this moment was partic- has has particular magical force. As Swedenborg put it, quote, partner sees partner in mind, each partner has the other in himself. So they cohabit in their innermost, end quote. In a visionary trance, partners are able to meet, communicate, even make love in their dismembered spiritual forms. Marcia Keith Suchard records that Blake's parents were members of this congregation and that Blake absorbed these ideas from his wide reading of Swedenborg. She has shown how the prudish Victorians erased from Blake's drawings such explicitly sexual imagery, including drawing pairs of underpants over genitals. Although there is a popular understanding that Blake was influenced by the esoteric philosophy of Swedenborg and others, we have until now overlooked these very specific techniques of sex magic that were at the root of his imaginative vision. Blake experienced visions from an early age. At the age of 4, he saw God looking in through the window, and at 4 or 5, while walking through the countryside, he had a vision of a tree filled with angels, quote, bespangling every bough like stars, end quote. But it seems that the secret techniques of Zinzendorf and Swedenborg gave him a systematic Kabbalistic approach to these phenomena. In Los, LOS, he would write, quote, in Beulah the female lets down her beautiful tabernacle, which the male enters magnificent between her cherubim and becomes one with her mingling. There's a place where contraries are equally true. This place is called Beulah. End quote. Okay. In Romanticism, the individual interior life has finally expanded to become a vast cosmos of infinite variety. Love is the love of one cosmos for another. Deep calls unto deep calls unto deep. With Romanticism, love moves into a new mode and becomes symphonic. The historical significance of this is that the secret meditations and prayerful practices of a handful of initiates created a popular surge of feeling against materialism. A new way of making love, of reenacting the creation of the cosmos, was a way of saying that right isn't simply a matter of might, that there are higher ideals than expediency or enlightened egotism, that if you work yourself into the right frame of mind, you can experience the world as meaningful. If the people make love so that they become illumined, the world will become a world of shadows. When they awake again, meaning all have settled on the world like dew. The roots of Romanticism, therefore, were both sexual and esoteric. The German poet Novalis talked of magical idealism, quote unquote. This magic, this idealism, this volcanic spirit conjured up the music of Beethoven and Schubert. Beethoven found himself hearing a new musical language, feeling and expressing things that had never been felt or expressed before. Like Alexander the Great, he became obsessed with trying to identify this divine flux, the source of his unstoppable genius, reading and rereading Egyptian and Indian esoteric texts. For him, his sonata in D minor and the Appassionata were his equivalents to Shakespeare's The Tempest, the most explicit expressions of his occult ideas. In France, the Martinist Charles Nodier had written of the conspiracies of secret societies in the armies of Napoleon to bring the great man down. Later, Nodier introduced the young French romantics, including Victor Hugo, Honore de Balzac, Honore de, I anyway, sorry, Dumas, Fils, Delacroix, and Gerard de Nerval to esoteric philosophy. Owen Barfield wrote that there is always a great current of Platonic ideas, a current of living meaning that from time to time fine intellects like Shakespeare and Keats can discern. Keats called the ability to do this negative capability, quote unquote, which he said was when a man is capable of being, quote, in uncertainties, mysteries, and doubts without any irritable searching after fact and reason, end quote. In other words, he was applying to poetry the same deliberate holding off, imposing a pattern and waiting for a richer pattern to emerge that Francis Bacon had advocated in the scientific sphere. Quote, weave a circle around him thrice, for he on honey dew hath fed, and drunk the milk of paradise. End quote. Samuel Taylor Coleridge carried an aura of the supernatural. He was deeply immersed in the thought of both Boehme and Swedenborg, but it was his friend, William Wordsworth, who wrote the purest, the most simple and direct expression of the feeling that lies in the heart of idealism as a philosophy of life. When Wordsworth wrote that he, quote, felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply infused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns, and this round ocean, and the living air, and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things, end quote. He's writing about what it feels like to be an idealist in a way which still feels quite modern. Some of this stuff, man, it's tough to read. It'd be easier to read silently. Even people who on a conscious level would deny the existence of the higher reality Wordsworth is alluding to here recognize something to this poem. Lines written above Tintern Abbey. Something somewhere inside them calls out in recognition, or it would be completely meaningless to them. At the time that Wordsworth was writing, people did not have to struggle to discern such feelings. Goethe, Byron, and Beethoven led a great popular movement. So why did it all go wrong? Why did this impulse for freedom end up in the abuse of power? To understand the roots of this catastrophe, it is necessary to trace the infiltration of the secret societies by the proponents of materialism. Chevalier Ramsay and specifically had specifically forbidden the discussion of politics in the lodges he founded in 1730, but Freemasonry had a hold on the political leaders of Europe. To anyone who wanted to exert political influence, it must have been a temptation. And that is finally the end of that chapter. That was a rough one because I was stumbling so much. But we are going to plow on. The next one looks like it's got a few more pictures. So it will probably go a little bit faster. But I am going to pause to go refill my water. So I will be right back in just a minute. Okay, I am back. I think it's time to change that "I'll be back" music. I've had it for a long time. I need to switch it up. Okay, hopefully I will not be stumbling through this chapter quite so much. I don't know. I just have my nights when I can't string a sentence together. And sometimes I am just throwing in words that are not even in the text anywhere, not even close. Don't know why. It's just my brain, I guess. Okay, so we're on chapter 26, and this one has its multi-part title, like all of them. The Illuminati and the Rise of Unreason, the Illuminati and the Battle for the Soul of Freemasonry, Occult Roots of the French Revolution, Napoleon's Star, Occultism and the Rise of the Novel. So those are the subjects. Okay, here goes. The story of the Illuminati is one of the darker episodes in the secret history, and has blackened the reputation of secret societies ever since. In 1776, a Bavarian professor of law, Adam Weishaupt, founded an organization called the Illuminati. Sorry, I want to get this up out of my way. It's annoying when it falls down. Founded an organization called the Illuminati, recruiting the first brothers from among his students. Like the Jesuits, the Illuminati Brotherhood was run on military lines. Members were requested to surrender individual judgment and will. Like earlier secret societies, Weishaupt's Illuminati promised to reveal an ancient wisdom. Higher and more powerful secrets were promised to those who progressed up the ladder of initiations. Initiates worked in small cells. Knowledge was shared between cells on what modern security services call a need to know basis. So dangerous was this newly rediscovered knowledge. Weishaupt joined the Freemasons in 1777, and soon many of the Illuminati followed, infiltrating the lodges. They quickly rose to positions of seniority. Then in 1785 it came about that a man called Jacob Lantz, traveling to Silesia, was struck by lightning. When he was laid out in a nearby chapel, the Bavarian authorities found papers on the body revealing the secret plans of the Illuminati. From these papers, including many in Weishaupt's own hand, and together with others seized in raids round the country, a complete picture was built up. The seized writings revealed that the ancient secret wisdom and the secret supernatural powers promulgated within the Illuminati had always been a cynical invention and a fraud. An aspirant progressed through the grades only to discover that the spiritual element in the teachings were merely a smokescreen. Spirituality was derided, spat upon. Christ's teachings, it was said, were really purely political in content, calling for the abolition of all property, of the institution of marriage, and all family ties, all religion. The aim of Weishaupt and his co-conspirators was to set up a society run on purely materialistic grounds, a revolutionary new society, and the place where they would test their theories, they had decided, would be France. Finally, it was whispered in the candidate's ear that the ultimate secret was that there was no secret. In this way, he was inducted into a nihilistic and anarchistic philosophy that appealed to the candidate's worst instincts. Weishaupt gleefully anticipated tearing down, destroying civilization, not to set people free, but for the pleasure of imposing his will upon others. Weishaupt's writings reveal the extent of his cynicism. Quote, "In concealment lies a great part of our strength. For this reason we must cover ourselves in the name of another society. The lodges that are under Freemasonry are the most suitable cloak for our high purpose." End quote. And then another quote, "Seek the society of young people," he advises one of his co-conspirators. "Watch them, and if one of them passes you, lay your hand on him." End quote. And a third quote, "Do you realize sufficiently what it means to rule in a secret society, not only over the most important of the populace, but over the best men, over men of all races, nations, and religions, to rule without external force. The final aim of our society is nothing less than to win power and riches and to obtain mastery of the world. End quote. Following the discovery of these writings, the order was suppressed, but too late. By 1789, there were some 300 lodges in France, including 65 in Paris. According to some French Freemasons today, there were more than 70,000 Freemasons in France. The original plan had been to impregnate people with hope and will for change, but lodges had been infiltrated to the extent that it has been said that quote, the program put into action by the French Constitutional Assembly in 1789 had been put together by German Illuminati in 1776, end quote. Danton, Dumoulin, Mirabeau, Marat, Robespierre, Guillotine, and other leaders had been illuminated. Okay, we have a picture. The caption is Diagram by Weishaupt. He writes to his co-conspirators, one must show how easy it would be for one clear mind to direct hundreds and thousands of men. Quote unquote. And here is that picture. I don't think you're going to be able to make out any of the writing. Looks like the same sort of thing as a pyramid scheme, like we've got tons of around today. It's in German. I can make out enough to know it's in German, but I can't read it. Um, not clear enough. Okay. When the king was slow to agree to further reforms, Dumoulin called for an armed uprising. Then in June 1789, Louis XVI tried to disperse the assembly and called his troops to Versailles. Oh, it looks like we're going into an ad. We'll see if it starts here. And it did. Okay, so I'm not going to read anything for the next minute. I'll just sit here and blather on about nothing, I suppose. I am enjoying this book, but at the same time, I do want to be done with it. Not because I'm getting tired of it, just I want to be done with it. I'm kind of anxious to move on to another one, just because that's how I am. Um, but I'm trying to decide what I want to read. So I'm trying to narrow it down. I need to figure it out by Tuesday, though. So, all right. So it says that we are back. So I'm going to start from the beginning of that paragraph since it was only one sentence. When the king was slow to agree to further reforms, Dumoulin called for an armed uprising. Then in June 1789, Louis XVI tried to disperse the assembly and called his troops to Versailles. Mass desertions followed. On 14 July, an angry mob stormed the Bastille. Louis XVI went to the guillotine in January 1793. When he tried to speak to the crowd, he was cut short by a roll on the drums. He was heard to say, People of France, I am innocent. I forgive those who are responsible for my death. I pray to God that the blood spilled here never falls on France or on you, my unfortunate people. End quote. That this should happen in the heart of the most civilized nation on earth opened the door to the unthinkable. It is said that in the melee that followed, a man jumped onto the scaffold and yelled, Jacques de Molay, you are avenged. End quote. If this is true, its sentiment was in stark contrast to the king's grace and charity. If you don't remember who Jacques de Molay was, he was the leader of the Knights Templars, and I don't think he was executed, but it was a long time after they wiped out the rest of the Templars, or the majority of the rest of the Templars. Anyway, moving on. In the anarchy that followed, France was threatened from within and without. The leaders of the Freemasonic lodges took control. Soon many of their number were accused of being traitors to the revolution, and so began the Terror. There are different estimates of the numbers executed. The driving force was the most principled of Freemasons, the austere and incorruptible lawyer Maximilien Robespierre, as head of the Committee of Public Safety and the man in charge of the police department. He was sending to the guillotine hundreds per day, adding up to some 2,750 executions. Out of this later total, only 650 were aristocrats. The rest, ordinary working people. Robespierre even executed Danton. Saturn was eating his own children. How could this be? How could the most enlightened and reasonable of men justify this bloodshed? In an idealistic philosophy, the ends never justify the means, because as we have seen, motives affect the outcome, however deeply hidden they may be. Robespierre shed blood as a grim duty to protect the rights of citizens and their property. From a rational point of view, he did what he did for the common good. Yet in Robespierre's case, this yearning to be completely reasonable seems to have driven him mad. On 8 July 1794, a curious ceremony took place in front of the Louvre. The members of the National Convention sat in a vast makeshift amphitheater, each holding an ear of wheat to symbolize the goddess Isis. Facing them was an altar by which stood Robespierre, wrapped in a light blue coat, his hair powdered white. He said, quote, "The whole universe is assembled here." End quote. Then, calling upon the Supreme Being, he began a speech which lasted several hours and ended, quote, "Tomorrow, when we return to work, we shall again fight against vice and tyrants." End quote. His speech lasted several hours? My God. Okay. And we have a picture with a fairly short caption. Napoleon said on more than one occasion that as long as no one else could see his star visible here in the sky, he would not allow anyone to distract him from following his own destiny. Okay. So that is that picture, presumably of Napoleon. All right. If members of the convention had hoped he was going to call an end to bloodshed, they were to be disappointed. Then he stepped up to a veiled effigy and set light to the cloth, revealing a stone statue of a goddess. The set had been designed by the illuminated Freemason Jean-Jacques David, so that the goddess Sophia would seem to arise from the flames like a phoenix. The poet Gerard de Nerval would later claim that Sophia had represented Isis, yet the ruling spirit of the times was not Isis, the lifting of whose veils leads to the spirit worlds. Neither was it Mother Nature, the gentle, nurturing goddess of the vegetable dimension of the cosmos. This was Mother Nature red in tooth and claw. Robespierre was accused of trying to have himself declared a god by an elderly prophetess called Catherine Theot. Anyway, revulsion at the start that sentence again. Revulsion at the relentless bloodletting reached a pitch, and a crowd laid siege to the Hôtel de Ville. Robespierre was at last cornered. He tried to shoot himself, but only succeeded in blowing away half his jaw. When he went to the guillotine, still wearing his light blue costume, he tried to declaim to the assembled multitude, but could only manage a strangulated cry. Yeah, because he only had half a jaw. Napoleon famously followed his star. This has been taken as a poetic way of saying that he was destined for great things. Goethe said to him, quote, "The demon, the I'm sorry, the quote, the daemon ought to lead us every day and tell us what we ought to do on every occasion, but the good spirit leaves us in the lurch, and we grope about in the dark. Napoleon was the man, always illuminated, always clear, and decided, and endowed at every hour with energy enough to carry out whatever he considered necessary. His life was astride of a demigod, from battle to battle, and from victory to victory. It might be said he was in a state of continual illumination. In later years, this illumination appears to have forsaken him as well as his fortune and his good star." End quote. How could Napoleon fail to have sense of destiny? He succeeded at everything he set his mind to, seemingly able to bend the whole world to his will. To himself and many of his contemporaries, he was the Alexander the Great of the modern world, uniting East and West by his conquests. French troops moved into Egypt. It was not a particularly glorious campaign, but it was important to Napoleon from a personal point of view. According to uh, Fouché, the head of the French secret police, Napoleon had a meeting with a man purporting to be Saint Germain inside the Great Pyramid. It certainly seems to be the case that Napoleon chose the esotericist and astrologer Fabre de Olivet as one of his advisors, and also arranged to spend a night alone in the Great Pyramid. Did Napoleon meet Saint Germain in the flesh or in spirit? Napoleon ordered the making of a catalogue of Egyptian antiquities, Description de Egypt. I, I just can't get that one out. It was dedicated to Napoleon le Grand, inviting comparison with Alexander the Great. He was portrayed on the front of the catalogue as Sol Invictus, the sun god. His empire would expand to include not only Italy and Egypt, but Germany, Austria, and Spain. No emperor had been crowned by the Pope since Charlemagne, but in 1804 Napoleon had Charlemagne's crown and scepter brought to him, and having forced Pope Pius VII to attend, Napoleon symbolically snatched the crown from his hands and crowned himself emperor. Napoleon employed a team of scholars to come to the conclusion that Isis was the ancient goddess of Paris, and then decreed that the goddess and her star should be included in Paris's coat of arms. On the Arc de Triomphe, Josephine is portrayed kneeling at his feet carrying the laurel of Isis. We can infer from this that Napoleon did not identify himself with Sirius. He followed it as Orion follows Sirius across the sky. In Freemasonic initiation ceremonies, candidates are reborn as Osiris was reborn, looking up at a five-pointed star that represents Isis. Osiris or Orion, the hunter, is the masculine impulse towards power, action, and impregnation, pursuing Isis, the gatekeeper to life's mysteries. This is how Napoleon thought of Josephine, born of a family deeply immersed in esoteric Freemasonry and already a Freemason herself when he met her. Napoleon could conquer mainland Europe, but he could never quite conquer the sublimely beautiful Josephine. He longed for her as Dante had longed for Beatrice, and longing made him aspire higher. Osiris and Isis were also, of course, associated with the sun and the moon, and on one level, as we have seen, this is to do with the cosmos's arranging of itself in order to make human thought possible. In ancient Egypt, the heliacal rising of Sirius in the middle of June presaged the rising of the Nile. In some esoteric traditions, Sirius is the central sun of the universe around which our sun rotates. This complex nexus of esoteric thought, combined with his love for Josephine, informed Napoleon's sense of destiny. But in 1813, the powers guiding and empowering Napoleon left him, as they always leave everyone, quite suddenly, and as Goethe had described, the powers of reaction rushed in from all sides to destroy him. We see the same process in the lives of artists. They struggle to find their voice, reach an inspired period during which they cannot put a brushstroke wrong, perhaps leading art into a new era. Then the spirit suddenly leaves them and they are unable to recapture it, no matter how hard they try. Throughout this history, we have repeatedly referred to the series of experiences a candidate must go through to achieve initiation, including the experience of Kamaloka, or purgatory, where the soul and spirit, still united, are attacked by demons. Now it is time to touch on the idea taught in the esoteric schools that the whole of humanity was to undergo something like an initiation. The secret, the, the secret societies were preparing for this event, helping humanity to develop the sense of self and other qualities that would be needed during the ordeal. In the middle decades of the 18th century, Freemasonry spread throughout the world to Austria, Spain, India, Italy, Sweden, Germany, Poland, Russia, Denmark, Norway, and China. Following in the footsteps of the American and French brethren, Freemasonry inspired republican revolutions all around the world. Madame Blavatsky wrote that among the Corbonari, the revolutionary precursors and pioneers of Garibaldi, there was more than one Freemason deeply versed in occult science and Rosicrucianism. Garibaldi himself was a 33rd degree Freemason and Grand Master of Italian Freemasonry. In Hungary, Louis Kossuth, and in South America, Simon Bolivar, Francisco de Miranda, Venustiano Carranza, Benito Juarez, and Fidel Castro all fought for freedom. Today in the U.S., there are among 13,000 lodges, and in 2001 it was estimated that there were some 7 million Freemasons worldwide. We have seen how Jesus Christ planted the seed of the interior life, how this interior life was expanded and populated by Shakespeare and Cervantes. In the 18th century, and particularly in the 19th century, the great initiate novelists forged the sense we all enjoy today that this interior world has its own history, a narrative with meanings, highs and lows, reversals of fortune and dilemmas, turning points when life-changing decisions may be made. The great novelists of the age, we think of the Brontes of Dickens, were also full of a sense that just as human consciousness was understood in esoteric thought to have evolved through history, so consciousness also evolves in individual human lives. John Comenius grew up in the Prague of Rudolf II, where he attended the coronation of the Winter King. He knew John Valentin Andre in Heidelberg and was then invited by his friend the occultist Samuel Hartlib to join him in London, quote, to help complete the work, end quote. By his educational reforms, Comenius would introduce into the mainstream of history the idea that in childhood we experience a very different state of mind from the one we develop in adulthood. We see Comenius's influence, Jane Eyre or David Copperfield, and we should be aware that it was very new then. But the idea of esoteric thought, which would have the biggest effect on the novel, would be that of the deeper laws. The novel provided an arena for novelists steeped in esoteric philosophy to show the work the working out of these laws in individual human lives. Okay, and then we have a picture with a very short caption that says illustration from Comenius's school book. Okay, and I have seen this one many times. I didn't know that was its um, source, but it looks like a demon and an angel both trying to influence a human over here in the main part of it, and then here someone is drawing out a magic circle for some sort of ceremony. And of course, the eye in the cloud, the all seeing eye. The time has come to get to grips with this elusive concept which lies right at the heart of the esoteric view of the cosmos and its history. We saw how Elijah, working behind the scenes of history, had helped bring about a split in consciousness between the objective Baconian consciousness and the subjective Shakespearean consciousness. We saw, too, how viewing the world as objectively as possible made the laws of physics snap into focus. But what about subjective experience? What about the structure of experience itself? In time, the science of psychology would arise, but psychology would make the materialistic assumption that matter influences the mind, never the other way around. Psychology then turned a blind eye to a universal part of human experience, the experience of meaning. What is this stream about? I read books. That's what it's about. We happen to be reading The Secret History of the World right now. Um, and I don't know what the next book will be, but that's what I do. I read so other people don't have to. Okay, back to the text. We have already touched on the way that Rosicrucians had begun to formulate laws in line with Oriental esoteric thought on the nameless way, inextricably bound up with notions of human well-being. In the East, there is an august tradition of tracing the operation of yang and its opposite yin. But in the West, this remained an elusive element that slipped between the emerging sciences of physics and psychology. If the laws that govern these elusive elements are difficult to think about, in abstract terms, it is much easier to see them in action. Some of the great novelists of the 19th century wrote explicitly occult novels. In addition to Dickens's A Christmas Carol, Emily Bronte's Wuthering Heights shows a spirit pursue its beloved from beyond the grave. George Eliot's Lifting the Veil, the fruit of her passionate investigation of the occult, was suppressed by her publisher. Then, as we shall see shortly, there was Dostoevsky. But as well as this explicit occultism, a more widespread influence is implicit in much more fiction. A great vision of the working out of the deeper laws in individual lives, the complex, irrational patterns that could not occur if science explained everything there is in the universe, can be found in the very greatest novels. Jane Eyre, Bleak House, Moby Dick, Middlemarch, War and Peace hold up a mirror to our lives and point up the significant patterns of order and meaning and meaning that are our universal experience, even when science tells us not to believe the evidence of our eyes, hearts, and minds. Okay, so now that I'm at a good stopping point to more fully answer your question, I read all kinds of stuff on this page. That's the whole point of it, is it's a reading stream. So I read stuff on the Masons, the Knights Templar. I've read stuff on slavery. I've read stuff on the occult. Um, quite a variety of stuff. But that's the whole point. Is I'm going to read these books, and so I stream me reading them, and I show the pictures and illustrations. So if anybody wants to listen in, they can. I get a lot of people that go to my YouTube channel and they just listen to the playlist and use it sort of like an audiobook. So yeah, that's what I'm doing. And we're getting towards the end of this book, so I'm going to be starting into something else. I haven't quite decided yet what that's going to be. I've got one more reading in this book to finish it out. So, um, all right, back to the text. We're a few pages from being done with this chapter. On one level, novels are all about egotism. A novel always involves seeing the world from other people's points of view. Reading a novel, therefore, lessens egotism. Also, the failings of characters in novels are very often to do with egotism, either in terms of self interest or, more particularly, the failure to empathize. But the greater contribution of the novel to the human sense of self is, as we have just suggested, the formation of the sense of an inner narrative, the sense that an individual life, seen from the inside, has a meaningful shape, a story. Okay, and then we have another picture, this time from Mother Goose. So let me read this caption. Mother Goose in an 18th century engraving. Mother Goose here reveals her secret identity as Isis, the moon goddess and priestess of the secret philosophy, not only by her name. In ancient Egypt, the goose was one of the traditional attributes of Isis, but also by the crescent shape of her profile. The fairy stories of folk tradition are saturated with the numinous and paradoxical qualities of the ancient and secret philosophy. Speaking of, I'll show you the picture and then I'll continue talking. Speaking of Mother Goose, I actually have been kicking around the idea of one of the books that I read next, or would be one of Andrew Lang's fairy books, like the Blue Fairy Book or one of those. There's, I think, 10 or 12 fairy books, and I have all of them, and I have not read any of them. Um, well, I've read parts of the Blue Fairy Book, but anyway, I've been kind of kicking around that idea because it would be, I think it would be fun. They're versions of fairy tales we've never read before, or fairy tales we've read many times, but never in this particular version. Some of them are pretty interesting. So, anyway, so there you go. Mother Goose as she appears, and up in here, I'm assuming that's what he means by her crescent shape, is because her cloak is flying up over her head there, so it does create sort of a crescent shape. Anyway, moving on. Underlying these notions of shape and meaning are beliefs that the ways people's lives are formed by their long tested what are formed. Whoa, this is a weird sentence. Underlying these notions of shape and meaning are beliefs about the ways people's lives are formed by their being tested, the labyrinth that keeps morphing. Okay, now I understand it. What shapes lives in novels is life's paradoxical quality, the fact that it does not run in a straight, predictable line, the fact that appearances are deceptive and that fortunes are reversed. The notions of the meaning of life and the deeper laws here come together. If these deeper laws really exist and are universal and so important and powerful, if history really does turn on them, isn't it perhaps surprising that we are not more aware of them? In fact, isn't it odd if we in the West don't even seem to have a name for them? It is surprising not least because of these laws because if these laws come into play when human happiness is at stake, it should follow that they could be very useful when it comes to our hopes of living in living a happy life. Of course, the most common sets of rules for achieving a happy life are the down to earth wisdom contained in Proverbs and the common sense cautionary advice traditionally given to children. But one difference is that both Proverbs and the cautionary advice given to children only address the basics, how to avoid physical harm and obtain the bare necessities, while the deeper laws deal in grand notions of destiny, good and evil. As we shall see, they advise us on satisfying our craving for the highest, most ineffable levels of happiness, our deepest needs for fulfillment and meaning. Compare the proverbial advice to, quote, look before you leap, end quote, with the recommendation contained in this perverse little parable by the proto-surrealist Guillaume Apollinaire. Quote, come to the edge, he said. They said, we are afraid. Come to the edge, he said. They came. He pushed them. They flew. End quote. Okay, so we have another picture. The caption is a little bit longer this time. It says, like Paracelsus, the brothers Grimm collected esoteric folklore before it died out. Dopey, happy, bashful, sleepy, grumpy, sneezy, and Doc might seem humorous, child-friendly, made-up names, but in fact, they are all literal translations of 7 earth demons from Scandinavian esoteric lore. Toki, Skaver, Var, Dun, Oren, Grer, and Radsvid. Even in the cozy world of Disney, the esoteric lies closer to the surface than you might think. Okay, and we have that picture. I would presume this is some sort of early illustration from Brothers Grimm of the 7 dwarves. What do we got? We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and there's 7. Well, that looks like an 8th one. Oh, maybe this one isn't one down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, I guess that's not one. It's just a lighter color in the illustration for the rocks there. Anyway, we're almost done. We've got about 3 pages of text left here. Inspired by the teachings of the secret societies, the Surrealists wanted to destroy entrenched ways of thought, to smash scientific materialism. One of the ways they did this was by promoting irrational acts. Here, Apollinaire is saying that if you act irrationally, you will be rewarded by the irrational forces of the universe. If what Apollinaire is saying is true, this is one of the deeper laws of the universe, a law of cause and effect lying outside the laws of probability. Surrealists were unusually open about their irrational philosophy and its roots in the secret societies. But this same irrational philosophy is also implicit in much more mainstream culture. Take It's a Wonderful Life, an old film that on the surface seems homely and comforting, together with its literary forebear, A Christmas Carol, which Charles Dickens imbued with the philosophy of the secret society of which he was an initiate. Scrooge is confronted by ghosts that present him with visions showing how his behavior has caused great misery, together with a vision of what will result if he continues in the same vein. George Bailey, the character played by James Stewart in It's a Wonderful Life, believes his life has been a complete failure and he is about to commit suicide when an angel shows him how much unhappier his family, friends, the whole town would have been were it not for him and his self-sacrificing nature. So both George Bailey and Scrooge are invited to ask themselves how the world would have been different if they had chosen to live differently. At the end of this process of questioning, both characters are asked to go through the same door they were about to go through at the beginning of the story, but this time do the right thing. George Bailey decides not to commit suicide and to face his creditors. Scrooge redeems himself by coming to the aid of Bob Cratchit and his family. So, in a way, both It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol depict life as having a kind of circular quality and of being a test. They show how life directs us towards crucial decisions and how we may be made to loop round and come back to confront these crucial decisions again if we get it wrong. I imagine that most of us feel that both It's a Wonderful Life and A Christmas Carol are in some way true. It's difficult to see how anything in science or nature could account for life's being patterned in this insistently testing way, but most of us probably feel that both these very popular works are more than just entertainments, that they say something deep about life. A few moments' consideration may now be enough to convince us that the same sorts of mysterious and irrational patterns also inform the structure of some of the greatest works of literature in the canon: Oedipus Rex, Hamlet, Don Quixote, Dr. Faustus, and War and Peace. Oedipus somehow draws to himself the thing he fears most and ends up killing his father and marrying his mother. Hamlet repeatedly ducks out of his life's challenge, avenging his father's murder, but this challenge returns to confront him in increasingly dire forms. Don Quixote holds a good-hearted vision of the world as a noble place, and so strong is this vision that by the end of the novel it has in some mysterious way transformed his material surroundings. In his heart of hearts, Faust knows that what he ought to do, but because he does not do it, a providential order in the universe punishes him. Tolstoy's hero, Pierre, is tortured by his love for Natasha. It is only when he lets go of his feelings for her that he wins her. Imagine if you fed all these great works of literature, in fact all literature, into a giant computer and asked it the question, what are the laws that determine whether or not a life is ultimately happy and fulfilled? I suggest the result would be a body of laws that included the following. If you duck out of a challenge, then that challenge will come around again in a different form. We always draw towards us what we fear most. If you choose the immortal path, ultimately you will pay for it. The immoral, I said immortal, immoral path, you'll pay for it. A good-hearted belief will eventually transform what is believed in. In order to hold on to what you love, you must let it go. This, then, is the type of law that gives great narrative literature its structure. And if we read Oedipus Rex or King Lear or Dr. Faustus or Middlemarch and feel that in a deep and important sense they are true, it is surely because the working out of the laws they portray resonates with our experience. They accurately depict the shape of our lives. Now imagine what would happen if you fed all the scientific data in the world into another gigantic computer and asked it the same question. The results, I suggest, would be very different. The best way to keep something is to try your hardest to do so and never give up. You cannot transform the world by wishful thinking. You must do something about it. If you can avoid being found out and punished by your fellow man, there is no reason to suppose a providential order will punish you, and so on. The implication is clear and confirms what we suggested earlier. We get very different results, two very different sets of laws, if we try to determine the structure of the world than we do if we try to determine the structure of experience. This is a distinction that Tolstoy wrote about in his essay On Life. Though the same laws operate in the outer world of external phenomena and in our inner life with its concern for meaning and fulfillment, they seem very different when we consider them separately. As Abraham Isaac Kook, one of the great Kabbalists of the 20th century and the first chief rabbi of Palestine, put it, quote, God is revealed in the deep feelings of the sensitive souls. The deeper laws can be discerned only if we view events in the external world with the deepest subjectivity as an artist or a mystic might. It is the subjectivity of these laws, the fact that they work so near to the center of consciousness, that makes it difficult for us to keep them in focus. Rainer Maria Rilke, the Central European poet, seems to come close to writing explicitly about these laws in a letter to an aspiring young poet. Quote, "Only the individual who is truly solitary is brought under the deep laws, and when a man steps out into the morning that is just beginning, he looks into the evening that is full of happenings, and when he feels what is coming to pass there, then all rank drops from him as from a dead man, although he is standing in the midst of sheer life." End quote. Rilke is using heightened poetic language, but he seemed to be confirming that these deeper laws can only be discerned if we shut out everything else and concentrate on them over a long time with our subtlest and most intense powers of discernment. Okay, 2 more paragraphs and we're done with this chapter. In the course of writing this book, I have met the young Irish mystic Lorna Byrne. She hasn't read any of the literature that lies behind this book, nor even previously met anyone who might have passed its ideas on. Her extraordinary knowledge of the spirit world has come from direct personal experience. She meets Michael, archangel of the sun, and has encountered the archangel Gabriel in the form of the moon, divided in half yet pressed together and moving, she says, like the turning of pages in a book. She has described to me seeing in the fields near her home the group spirit of the fox in the form of the fox but with human-like elements. She meets Elijah, who was once a human with the spirit of an angel, and she has seen him walk on water like the green one of the Sufi tradition. Hers is an alternative method of perception, a parallel dimension that moves things around in our own. In the late 19th century, ancient creatures began to stir in the depths of the earth, to slouch towards the appointed place. Imprisoned since the first war in heaven, the consciousness eaters were on the move again. And that is the end of that chapter. So we have 2 more. I will go ahead and read the title for the next one so you know what's coming up, and then we'll see if there's anybody around to raid. Thank you all for coming in and hanging out. So the title to this next one that we will do on Tuesday is The Mystic Death of Humanity, Swedenborg and Dostoevsky, Wagner, Freud, Jung, and the Materializing of Esoteric Thought, The Occult Roots of Modernism, Occult Bolshevism, and Gandhi. So we will get to that Tuesday, like I said. That will be the end of this book. So I will need to decide what I'm going to read by next Friday, the next book I'm going to read. So I'll probably do a survey on X with a few suggestions and let you all vote on it. All right, who we got? Who is around? Zeus is on, but he's got a big enough crowd. He doesn't need us there. And I just rated him not long ago. Yeah, not really seeing anybody on right now. It is later than normal. I'm normally done by 11. So we'll just call it here tonight. We won't raid anybody. So I will see you all in the next one, which will most likely be the Tuesday reading, unless I finally get back to my Star Wars reading on Monday, which I'm going to try to do. We'll see. But see you in whichever reading is next. Have a good night.
Feeling shattered skies, watching teary blue eyes, wonder where I might find some peace of mind. Not nights like I've had, but more sophisticated.